me, not Thunderbird graduate, but like many other people that are not Thunderbird graduates, sometimes they're really amazing, and Todd is really amazing. I've seen him firsthand. He's been a really key resource for Global Chamber with the Canton Fair and the relationship we have with them. The first time I met Todd was actually in Detroit when we did an event on the Canton Fair there. There's quite a large Chinese community there. Todd lived in China for over 20 years. He speaks fluent Mandarin. At least that's what he says, and I believe him because I've seen him speaking, and it's very impressive. And when I used to live in Detroit, and we stopped at a place called Monjin Lao. If you've lived in Detroit, you probably know about that restaurant. I see a shaking head there. And he knew the people there and spoke to them in Mandarin, so that was very impressive for me. But more impressive is his knowledge about China and the business there, and he helps companies be more successful in China. He more recently, and I just received it actually in the mail, has published or he's compiled the 5 skills of Bing Fa. Thank you very much. I can't even pronounce English, but Bing Fa is Chinese. And so we really appreciate your support for Global Chamber. He's actually based out of Colorado, Fort Collins. I got the location correct this time, and in our Denver Global Chamber Denver chapter. So Todd, tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing out there.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So, good morning. I feel like I went through worse jet lag coming from Denver to Phoenix than I did going from the US to China. I drove. Was not a good idea, but we learn from our mistakes. So I'm really happy to be here to have this opportunity. Thank you to Thunderbird, to the Global Chamber, everybody who's involved, the sponsors. 我非常高兴今天能够有机会和你们大家在一起。I will try and express my own perspectives. These are my experiences, my perspectives from living in China, working in China. I moved to China in the mid-'80s, and so I've seen changes in China that the people who go today have no concept of. I'm sort of old school. When I go back to China and I speak to the kids, they're like, you talk like my mother and father. And that's a compliment, actually. So I worked for Corning Glass joint venture. I was in charge of mediating, interpreting, managing sort of the tech situations that were going on there. We had people from France, the US, from Poland, and then also the Chinese. And so I was there to help them to sort of go between and work through their challenges in communications and culture. And then also worked for several other US corporations. And I was also a concierge at the Shanghai Hilton when it first opened back in the 80s. So I've been in a lot of different areas of China, and I'm one of those people that just goes in and jumps in head first, or dives in. And so I didn't hang out with the foreigners. I hung out with the Chinese. I worked with the foreigners. And so that experience brought to me a lot of really, really challenging situations because I didn't understand what was going on. I got taken advantage of. I had all sorts of things happening, and I couldn't figure out why. But I also had good friends, and those were friends that I trusted, and those are people who helped me to understand what I was doing wrong. You don't do this. I remember several friends saying to me, Todd, you can't change the Chinese. 不可以改变中国人. You know, because number one, I was in China. I'm an American, and we do as Americans tend to have a sense of, you know, we're kind of like, we kind of get it, you know, we know what we're doing. It works really well in America. But what happens is that we have a big surprise when we get to China and other countries too, but I can only speak for China and the US, the differences. So through all of that, learning the language, the challenges, and all of the expressions of the Chinese language, Chinese culture has been in some form continuing for, some would say 7,000 years, some would say 4, but actually it's around 3,500. We can read the writings and the manuscripts, the Tao, the art of war, things like that. We can read those today. We can understand the way the Chinese culture evolved. And one thing that we need to remember is that those same things are very much a part of the Chinese and who they are. One thing about driving down here last night was that it gave me the opportunity to re-listen to one of my favorite books on the I Ching. And one thing that the man brought up, the speaker brought up, is that for the Chinese, what's important is that they have a Chinese character for China, and it's the character for Zhong, and it means center, but that's not what it represents. It represents the idea of yin-yang, because it's a square with a line between it, and so it's showing a balance between these two things, and how important yin-yang is in Chinese culture. And this is something that we don't understand. The Chinese mindset is a mindset that's made up of yin-yang. It's in their language, it's in their culture, it's in their everyday interactions. Balance is the most important thing for them. Harmony, friendship, these are things that the Chinese relish. These are things that work in China. Now, if you stop as an American or a person who's lived in America and understands better how the Americans interact, that is not our MO. That's not the way we work. That's not how we interact with people. We go in, we talk business, we get it over with, and we go home and everything's good. But for the Chinese, that doesn't work because there's no sense of interaction. It's almost there's a lack of humanness. And so finding that balance, I wrote an article recently, and it's about the trade wars are really a clash of cultural mindset. That's how I see it working out. Yeah, there's the things that Jonah mentioned, and those are all very important, but what they're coming from is they're coming from that same American mindset. And then they're trying to interact with people who have a very different mindset, and they don't understand how to work together. The Chinese are going to maybe seem a little bit less pushy because that's their nature, but that doesn't mean that they can't be more pushy. And that's the thing that's really important to understand about China, is that we want to be their friend. We want to work with them. We want to work in ways that work for them because we will gain benefit from that. But as soon as we start putting pressure on them and we start hanging their dirty laundry out for the world to see, that's going to cause a lot of problems. There's an expression in Chinese, 家丑不可外扬. You can't hang your dirty laundry out for people to see. And it's a thing of face, too. The Chinese people, the Chinese culture, they have a sense of face. If we're tapping on their face, and this is sort of like how they would express that, then we're not being the way we should. So there is a point where we need to stop and see what can we do to change our ways. That different cultural mindset, and I'll just leave you with this, is that the Chinese cultural mindset is made up like a yin-yang. And if you know the symbol, what we call the two fish, black and white, that's a 2D rendition of a 3D reality. The black is changing into white, the white is changing into black, and they're moving, constantly changing and flexing. Whereas the Western, the American mindset is more like a black and white checkerboard. We don't have the crossover between the interaction with, and things are much more compartmentalized. So we have a hard time understanding how this that was like that can all of a sudden become this. But when we can start opening up more to being able to see how the Chinese think, how their worldview extends, and how we can interact with that for our own benefit, then that's the way I think that we're going to start seeing some improvements. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. We're not there yet, are we, with that?
No, we're not, unfortunately.
So what we're doing is we're having each speaker give a few minutes, and then there'll be time for questions after. And I would imagine we'll have about 40 to 45 minutes or